Some mysteries refuse to fade, clinging to the fabric of a community like a cold, persistent fog. In the quiet, lakeside town of Williston, Vermont, along the serene shores of Lake Champlain, one question has echoed for 9 long years. What truly happened to Officer Sarah Jenkins? On a crisp autumn morning, the 11th of October, 2013, this dedicated patrol officer simply vanished without a trace. Her last radio call came at 8:42 in the morning, a routine check-in. 9 years later, what divers discovered would send a shiver down the spine of even the most seasoned investigators. This isn't just another missing person case. This is a story about the deceptive calm of small-town America, about secrets hidden beneath seemingly tranquil waters, and about a discovery so unsettling it would force everyone involved to question everything they thought they knew. Before we dive into this chilling mystery, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more vanished stories. Stick around to the very end to uncover the full, shocking truth. Officer Sarah Jenkins wasn't just another face behind a badge. At 34 years old, she had dedicated 8 years of her life to patrolling the tranquil, winding roads that hugged the shores of Lake Champlain. Locals knew her dark blue Ford Explorer patrol vehicle by its distinctive, well-maintained gleam, and they knew Sarah by her calm demeanor and the quiet professionalism she brought to every call. She stood 5 feet 7 inches tall, with auburn hair usually pulled back in a practical braid, her uniform always pressed to perfection. Sarah had a reputation for going above and beyond, often stopping to offer directions to lost tourists or helping stranded motorists with minor repairs. She kept a small toolkit, jumper cables, and an emergency blanket neatly stowed in the back of her patrol car. In her 8 years of service, Sarah had never missed a shift, never received a single complaint, and was known for her steady hand during even the most tense situations. Her supervisor often referred to her as the bedrock of the department, a reliable presence in a world that often felt unpredictable. That autumn morning, the 11th of October, 2013, dawned with a clear sky stretching over Lake Champlain. The air was cool, hinting at the coming winter, with a comfortable temperature of 52 degrees and a gentle breeze rustling the colorful leaves. Sarah arrived at the station at 7:15 in the morning, 15 minutes early as was her habit. She performed her routine equipment check, testing her radio, meticulously inspecting her patrol car's tires and engine, and reviewing the overnight incident reports. The dispatcher on duty remembered her pausing by the desk to chat briefly about her plans for the upcoming weekend. She intended to spend Saturday hiking one of the popular trails in the nearby mountains. At 7:45 in the morning, Sarah made her first radio contact with dispatch, reporting clear weather conditions and normal traffic flow along her assigned route, which covered the western edge of the county, closely following the lake. Her voice sounded relaxed and professional, with no hint of concern or any unusual circumstances. The dispatcher later recalled it being just another routine Friday morning conversation. The last anyone heard from Officer Sarah Jenkins was her final radio check-in, reporting her location as mile marker 78 near the old lighthouse on the lake's northern shore. The time was precisely 8:42 in the morning. Her voice was normal, perhaps a touch of routine fatigue after starting her shift before dawn, but showing no signs of distress or alarm. She was expected to check in again at 9:30 for a status update. The radio then fell silent. Later, investigators would analyze that final transmission countless times, searching for any subtle clue, any hidden meaning in her seemingly ordinary words. They found nothing. Sarah's last words were routine, professional, unremarkable, and utterly final. By 9:45 in the morning, dispatcher Linda Chavez noticed Sarah hadn't made her scheduled check-in. Following standard protocol, she attempted radio contact. Static filled the airwaves, a hollow hiss that quickly grew unnerving. At 10:15, Chavez tried again, her voice now carrying a distinct note of concern as she called out Sarah's badge number. Still no response. The radio silence stretched uncomfortably, a heavy blanket descending over the typically bustling dispatch office as other units on patrol began listening intently for their missing colleague. The air in the small office thickened with unspoken apprehension. At 10:30 in the morning, Sergeant Mark Johnson, a veteran officer with 2 decades on the force and a quiet, watchful demeanor, attempted to reach Sarah directly. When his calls went unanswered and the silence persisted, a cold dread began to settle in. Johnson, knowing Sarah's unwavering reliability, understood this was not a simple oversight. At 10:45, he initiated full search protocols, his voice tight with an urgency that was rarely heard. The clock on the station wall read 11:15 in the morning when the first search units, their red and blue lights cutting through the crisp autumn air, rolled out of the parking lot. None of them knew they were beginning a search that would consume the community for 9 agonizing years. The silence that began that autumn morning would become the most haunting sound the town of Williston had ever known, a silent question mark hanging over every lake ripple and every rustling leaf. It was a silence that spoke of an absence, a void where a vibrant life had been just hours before. The initial organized search focused on Sarah's last reported location near the old lighthouse, a familiar landmark to locals and tourists alike. Teams combed the rocky shoreline and the wooded areas immediately surrounding it, but found nothing. Not a single piece of evidence. The calm, blue surface of Lake Champlain seemed to hold its secrets tightly, reflecting only the endless sky above. The initial search efforts, though swift and comprehensive, yielded no immediate answers, only deepening the unsettling mystery that had suddenly enveloped their peaceful town. 3 patrol units raced toward mile marker 78 as the late autumn sun dipped lower toward the horizon. Sergeant Mark Johnson coordinated the search from his cruiser, directing officers to spread out along Sarah's known route, a stretch of highway that hugged the picturesque shoreline of Lake Champlain. They arrived at her last known location near the old lighthouse, a stoic sentinel against the vast expanse of water, but the area revealed no clues. The asphalt showed no skid marks, no broken glass glinted in the fading light, and there were absolutely no signs of an accident or a struggle. Sarah's distinctive dark blue Ford Explorer, her reliable patrol vehicle, was nowhere to be seen. It was as if the earth had simply swallowed it whole. As darkness fell, local volunteers, their faces etched with concern, began arriving with flashlights and lanterns, their beams piercing the deepening gloom. Farmers abandoned their evening chores, their tractors left idle in the fields, to join the impromptu search. Wives, with worried eyes, packed sandwiches and thermoses of hot coffee, distributing them to the growing ranks of searchers. Children were sent to stay with neighbors, shielded from the unsettling reality that had descended upon their quiet town as adults organized themselves into more cohesive search teams. They combed ditches alongside the highway, their steps crunching on fallen leaves, checked abandoned lakeside cabins and boat sheds, and called Sarah's name into the growing darkness, their voices swallowed by the vastness of the lake and the woods. The rural community, which had always embraced Sarah as one of their own, rallied with a fierce determination to find her. But as midnight approached, casting long, eerie shadows, the searchers had found nothing. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore, a sound that now seemed chillingly indifferent. Dawn on the 12th of October brought reinforcements from across 3 counties, their arrival marked by the distant wail of sirens. State police helicopters swept the countryside in grid patterns, their rotors beating a steady rhythmic thrum that could be heard for miles, while ground teams systematically followed every dirt road, every farm track, every wooded path. Sheriff's deputies from neighboring counties arrived with tracking dogs and specialized search equipment, their experienced presence a grim testament to the gravity of the situation. The command post, hastily established in the parking lot of the Williston Town Hall, buzzed with activity as search coordinators plotted areas already covered and assigned new sections to the tireless volunteer teams. Local news crews, their cameras flashing, set up equipment as the story of the missing patrol officer spread rapidly across Vermont and into neighboring states. By noon, more than 200 people were involved in the massive search effort. Dogs picked up a faint scent near the lighthouse, but lost it abruptly after a few hundred yards, as if Sarah had simply vanished into thin air. Despite the overwhelming, almost desperate effort, the vast landscape around Lake Champlain seemed to have swallowed Sarah and her vehicle without leaving a single, undeniable trace. The sheer emptiness of the search area, contrasted with the intensity of the search, only deepened the unsettling mystery. The small town of Williston, nestled by the vast expanse of Lake Champlain, found itself gripped by a fear it had rarely known. The disappearance of Officer Sarah Jenkins, a dedicated public servant and a familiar face, was not just a headline. It was a personal blow to nearly every household. News traveled quickly, not just through official channels, but on the hushed whispers in the town's only grocery store, in the pensive silences at the local diner, and through the concerned glances exchanged at the morning school drop-off. Children, usually oblivious, sensed the change in their parents' demeanor. The vibrant autumn colors that had painted the landscape now seemed to mock the growing pall of anxiety. Prayer vigils, hastily organized, filled the town's small community hall each evening. Residents, young and old, gathered with bowed heads, their voices a low murmur of hope and despair. Candles flickered in windows, a silent testament to the collective grief and the desperate wish for Sarah's safe return. The initial frantic energy of the search had given way to a more profound, unsettling dread as the hours stretched into days. Every passing minute without news felt like a heavy weight pressing down on the collective spirit of Williston. Sarah was known for her quiet dedication, her calm resolve, and her unassuming nature. She was the officer who remembered names, who knew the quirks of the old families, and who always had a moment for a friendly word. Her absence left a palpable void, a silent scream in a town accustomed to peace. People started locking their doors at night, a habit previously reserved for absent-minded tourists. Parents grew more protective, keeping their children closer, their gazes lingering on the shadows that now seemed to deepen earlier in the day. The once familiar hum of daily life in Williston was replaced by an undercurrent of unease, a constant, nagging question that floated in the crisp autumn air. As the first 24 hours passed, then 36, then 48, with no sign of Sarah or her patrol vehicle, the initial hope that she had simply had an accident began to wane. The lack of any wreckage, any skid marks, any definitive trace whatsoever, made the disappearance even more perplexing. It defied logic. How could a fully equipped patrol car and a seasoned officer simply vanish without a single clue? The absence of evidence was not reassuring. It was terrifying. It suggested a deliberate, almost surgical, removal. The community, bound by shared grief and a growing sense of vulnerability, could only watch, wait, and pray as the autumn days grew shorter and the mystery deepened, casting a long, chilling shadow over their once tranquil lakeside town. The fear was no longer just for Sarah, but for the unsettling implications of her impossible vanishing. As the initial intense surge of search efforts subsided, a new, more frustrating phase of the investigation began. Weeks bled into months. The autumn leaves, once vibrant, now lay in brittle heaps, and the crisp air of early disappearance gave way to the biting cold of winter. Still, there was no sign of Officer Sarah Jenkins or her patrol vehicle. The case, now officially a missing person investigation with an increasingly grim outlook, shifted its focus from active search to meticulous, painstaking detective work. Every lead, no matter how tenuous, had to be pursued. Tips poured in from surrounding states, each requiring careful investigation. A truck driver swore he saw a dark blue SUV matching Sarah's vehicle near a rest stop in Pennsylvania. A woman in New Hampshire claimed to have seen a person resembling Sarah working at a small roadside diner. Every single tip, however, led to a dead end. Investigators traveled hundreds of miles, chasing ghosts, only to find mistaken identities, faulty memories, or outright hoaxes. The sheer volume of these false leads was exhausting, consuming valuable resources and time while offering no tangible progress. Compounding the frustration were the numerous calls from self-proclaimed psychics and clairvoyants. They offered visions of Sarah trapped in abandoned barns, buried in remote fields, or held captive in underground bunkers. Each call was cataloged and reviewed, but none provided any actionable intelligence. The department, though desperate for answers, quickly learned to filter these claims, understanding that hope often fueled elaborate but baseless theories. The local media, initially sympathetic and focused on the search, began to shift their narrative. While still covering the ongoing investigation, there was a noticeable increase in speculation. Was it a runaway? Was there something in Sarah's personal life that had gone unnoticed? The relentless scrutiny and the endless stream of unverified information added another layer of pressure to the already strained police department. Meanwhile, the massive Lake Champlain, a body of water so vast it could swallow secrets whole, became a primary focus. Specialized sonar equipment was brought in, meticulously mapping sections of the lake bed near Sarah's last known location. Divers, braving the icy winter waters, conducted systematic searches in promising areas. The process was slow, arduous, and often yielded nothing but sunken logs and discarded debris. The underwater visibility was often poor, making the already challenging task almost impossible. Every dive, every sonar sweep, ended with the same disheartening result. Nothing. The lake remained silent, its depths guarding whatever secrets it held. The surrounding forests, now barren of leaves, were recombed by ground teams, looking for any overlooked detail, any misplaced item. But the endless, monotonous stretches of barren trees and snow-dusted ground offered no new insights. The sheer, overwhelming emptiness of the vast search area, combined with the lack of any significant evidence, began to weigh heavily on the investigators. It felt as though Sarah Jenkins had not just disappeared, but had been meticulously erased from the landscape. The case was growing colder with each passing day, slipping deeper into the agonizing realm of unsolved mysteries, leaving a gaping wound in the heart of Williston. As the relentless search for Officer Sarah Jenkins yielded no definitive answers, the focus of the investigation shifted from the physical landscape to the abstract realm of possibilities. Without a body, a vehicle, or even a single, undeniable piece of evidence, investigators were left to grapple with a series of unsettling theories, each one a stark reflection of the unknown. The task force, now a smaller, more specialized unit, meticulously categorized and recategorized every scenario, seeking the elusive thread that might lead to the truth. One prominent theory, Often the first considered in such disappearances was that of mechanical failure. Sarah's patrol car, a robust Ford Explorer, was a reliable vehicle, but even the newest machinery could betray its operator. Perhaps a sudden, catastrophic engine failure had sent the vehicle careening off the road into a hidden ravine or deep into the depths of Lake Champlain. This theory gained some traction initially, especially given the remote nature of parts of Sarah's patrol route. However, the absence of any skid marks, any broken tree branches, or any disturbed ground along the roadside near her last known location cast a significant shadow of doubt on this explanation. Furthermore, the lake had been extensively searched, and no large metallic objects, consistent with a submerged vehicle, had been detected by sonar in the more accessible areas. If the car had plunged into a particularly deep or silty section, it might remain hidden, but the lack of even a small piece of debris was troubling. Another theory, equally grim, centered on a sudden medical emergency. Perhaps Sarah had suffered an unexpected heart attack, a stroke, or a sudden, incapacitating seizure while driving. In such a scenario, the vehicle could have veered off the road and into a secluded area, or, more terrifyingly, into the lake. This possibility was heartbreaking to consider but medically plausible. Yet Sarah was known for her excellent health, undergoing regular physical examinations that revealed no underlying conditions. While such events are rare, they are not impossible. However, this theory, much like mechanical failure, struggled to explain the complete absence of any physical evidence. No signs of a struggle if she tried to stop the car, no crash debris, no disturbed earth. The almost surgical disappearance of both officer and vehicle remained the central, baffling enigma. Then came the darker, more unsettling possibilities. Foul play. Had Sarah encountered someone dangerous on her patrol? Was she targeted? The small-town nature of Williston made this theory particularly disturbing. In close-knit communities, strangers stand out, and anonymity is a rare commodity. Yet, the very isolation of her patrol route could have provided an opportunity for an assailant to act undetected. This theory opened a Pandora's box of questions. If foul play was involved, who was responsible? A random perpetrator? Someone from the community? A professional who left no trace? The absence of a crime scene, a struggle, or any witness amplified the terror of this possibility. There were no ransom demands, no taunting calls, nothing to indicate a motive beyond simple abduction or worse. This lack of communication from any potential perpetrator only deepened the sense of chilling randomness. Finally, the most disheartening theory, and one that deeply troubled those who knew Sarah, was that of a voluntary disappearance. Could she have simply walked away from her life? This was immediately dismissed by her colleagues and family. Sarah had no known financial troubles, no strained relationships, and no history of mental health issues that might suggest such a drastic step. Her life was stable, she was respected, and she had plans for the future. Her dedication to her job and her community was unwavering. The idea that she would abandon her post, her family, and her life without a word was anathema to everything they knew about her character. Yet, in the absence of any other explanation, it had to be considered, however briefly, before being discarded as profoundly unlikely. Each of these theories had its flaws, its unexplained gaps. They were like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that refused to fit together, leaving a gaping, empty space at the center. The investigators were left with a collection of unsettling possibilities, none of which fully explained the complete and utter vanishing of Officer Sarah Jenkins and her patrol car. The case slowly, agonizingly, began to grow cold. settling into the vast unspoken lexicon of Vermont's unsolved mysteries. The frustration of these unanswered questions gnawed at the edges of the investigation, leaving a lingering sense of despair for those who desperately sought the truth. The lake, the forests, the quiet roads, they all remained silent, holding their secrets tight. As months bled into years, the case of Officer Sarah Jenkins, once a searing wound in the heart of Williston, began to ossify into a cold file, relegated to the back shelves of the state police headquarters. The initial flurry of activity had long since subsided, replaced by a quiet, gnawing sense of defeat. However, some cases, some mysteries, simply refused to be forgotten, persistently whispering for attention. The case file, thick with countless dead ends and unanswered questions, landed on the desk of Detective Alex Reed in the spring of 2019, nearly 6 years after Sarah's disappearance. Reed was a transplant, having recently transferred from a larger, more urban police force in Boston. He carried with him the sharp analytical mind honed by years of navigating complex city crimes, a stark contrast to the more localized investigations typical of Vermont's rural landscape. His colleagues sometimes found his meticulous approach almost obsessive, but it was precisely this quality that made him a formidable investigator. Reed was a man of quiet intensity, his gaze often distant as if perpetually sifting through hidden details. He had a reputation for approaching cold cases with a fresh, unbiased perspective, unburdened by the emotional fatigue that often plagued long-standing investigations. He had no prior connection to Williston or to Sarah Jenkins, which allowed him to view the mountain of reports, witness statements, and forensic analyses with a dispassionate eye. He began by doing something surprisingly simple, yet often overlooked in the rush of immediate crisis. He started from the very beginning. He didn't skim. He didn't jump to conclusions. He read every single page of the case file, absorbing every detail, every handwritten note from the initial search teams, every transcribed phone call from concerned citizens, every technical report from the sonar searches of Lake Champlain. He spent weeks immersed in the documentation, occasionally making notes in the margins, highlighting inconsistencies and flagging areas that, in his estimation, had not been thoroughly explored. He paid particular attention to the timeline of Sarah's last known movements, the precise minute of her final radio check-in, the estimated time she would have completed her patrol route, the moments leading up to the fateful 9:30 a.m. missed check-in. He noticed that while the area around the lighthouse had been exhaustively searched, the deeper, less accessible coves along the lake, particularly those with steep, rocky cliffs that made ground access difficult, had received less attention during the frantic initial days. The sheer scale of Lake Champlain, a body of water over 190 kilometers long and nearly 20 kilometers wide at its broadest point, meant that a truly comprehensive underwater search was a monumental undertaking, constrained by technology and resources at the time of Sarah's disappearance. Reed hypothesized that perhaps Sarah's vehicle, if it had indeed entered the lake, could have done so in one of these less examined, more challenging locations. He also found himself scrutinizing the early witness statements, looking for minute discrepancies that might have been overlooked in the chaos of a rapidly unfolding missing person case. He cross-referenced accounts, drew diagrams, and even revisited some of the original reporting officers, quietly asking them to recount their memories from that chaotic October morning. He sensed a subtle undercurrent in some of the initial interviews with longtime Williston residents, a certain reticence or a tendency to provide only superficial information, particularly when asked about the more isolated, lesser-known parts of the area. It was not overt obstruction, but a subtle, almost imperceptible closing off, a quiet deflection that sparked Reed's trained instincts. He found himself increasingly drawn to the idea that the answer might not be in what was found, but in what was deliberately not found, or perhaps what was intentionally concealed. This meticulous, almost obsessive review of the cold case file allowed Detective Reed to gain a comprehensive understanding of the full scope of the investigation, illuminating the challenges, the dead ends, and the lingering questions that continued to plague the vanishing of Officer Sarah Jenkins. His arrival marked a subtle but significant turning point, injecting a fresh, analytical energy into a mystery that had long been resigned to the archives of the unsolved. As Detective Alex Reed delved deeper into the cold case files, his meticulous review of Sarah Jenkins's disappearance began to yield a disturbing pattern. It wasn't just the sheer lack of evidence that gnawed at him. It was the chilling familiarity of the circumstances. He decided to expand his research beyond the immediate vicinity of Williston and into the broader New England region, focusing on unsolved missing persons cases from recent years. What he uncovered sent a prickle of unease down his spine. His search through regional police databases, often tedious and reliant on fragmented information, revealed two other unsolved disappearances that resonated with Sarah's case. The first was the vanishing of 28-year-old Mark Turner, a solo kayaker who had gone missing from a remote section of Lake George in upstate New York, just over the Vermont border, in the summer of 2015. Turner had been an experienced outdoorsman, familiar with the lake's currents and conditions. His last known communication was a text message to his sister, sent at 2:15 in the afternoon, stating he was enjoying the quiet solitude of the lake. His empty kayak was found drifting near the shore the following morning, neatly tied to a tree, but without any sign of a struggle or distress. His paddle and personal belongings were still inside the kayak. The search for Turner had been extensive, involving state police and marine patrols, but like Sarah, he had seemingly vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions and an eerie lack of evidence. The lake, vast and deep, had given up no further secrets. The second case involved a 40-year-old female geologist, Dr. Eleanor Vance, who disappeared while conducting field research near Moosehead Lake in northern Maine in the autumn of 2016. Dr. Vance was working alone, collecting rock samples in a heavily wooded, isolated area known for its dense forests and numerous waterways. Her vehicle was found parked neatly on a logging road, her equipment laid out beside it, as if she had just stepped away for a moment. Her research notes and personal items were all present, undisturbed. The search had involved search and rescue teams, tracking dogs, and even aerial surveys, but like Turner and Jenkins, Eleanor Vance had simply ceased to exist, leaving no trace of violence, no struggle, and no indication of her fate. The wilderness, vast and unforgiving, had offered no answers. Reed noticed the troubling similarities: lone individuals, daylight hours, and disappearances near large, often deep, bodies of water. In each case, there was an inexplicable absence of struggle or overt signs of foul play at the immediate site. The vehicles or personal belongings were found intact, almost deliberately untouched, as if to imply a voluntary departure or a non-violent event. This eerie tidiness contradicted the chaos usually associated with abduction or accidental drowning. It was as if the victims had simply stepped out of their lives without a ripple. The common thread of large, deep lakes was particularly unsettling to Reed. Lake Champlain, Lake George, and Moosehead Lake were all vast, ancient bodies of water, capable of concealing secrets for centuries. Their depths were largely uncharted in detail, and their shorelines often remote and sparsely populated. Reed began to theorize that the water was not just a backdrop, but perhaps an integral part of the disappearing act. Was there an aquatic element? Or simply that the isolation afforded by such locations provided the perfect conditions for a crime to occur undetected? The more he studied these three cases side by side, the more a chilling hypothesis began to form in Detective Reed's mind. This was not a series of random, isolated incidents. The methodical nature of the vanishings, the lack of struggle, and the choice of remote, lakeside locations suggested a pattern. It pointed towards a perpetrator who was meticulous, patient, and intimately familiar with these secluded areas and the way they could be used to conceal a crime. The possibility that a predator was operating across state lines, utilizing the vast, interconnected network of remote lakes and forests, was a terrifying one. It transformed Sarah Jenkins' isolated disappearance from a tragic local incident into a potential piece of a larger, more sinister puzzle. Reed knew that uncovering the truth behind Sarah's vanishing now meant understanding these other shadows that lingered in the depths of other lakes, echoing her own inexplicable fate. This expanded understanding pushed the boundaries of the investigation beyond a simple missing persons case, hinting at a far more complex and disturbing narrative at play. Detective Alex Reed's growing conviction that Sarah Jenkins' disappearance was linked to a larger, more sinister pattern led him down increasingly obscure paths. His efforts to unearth more information about the historical disappearances, particularly the two cases from Lake George and Moosehead Lake that mirrored Sarah's vanishing, met with a subtle yet pervasive resistance. It was not outright obstruction from law enforcement. Rather, it was a palpable reluctance from the longtime residents in those communities, a quiet turning away from uncomfortable truths. When Reed contacted the local sheriff's departments in the areas surrounding Lake George and Moosehead Lake, he found them cooperative on the surface, providing him with access to their own cold case files. However, when he attempted to speak with individuals who had lived in those remote lakeside communities for decades, people who might hold anecdotal knowledge or forgotten details, he encountered a wall of polite but firm silence. Some claimed to remember nothing distinct about the vanishings, despite the fact that such events would have undoubtedly rocked their small towns. Others offered vague, almost evasive answers, changing the subject or expressing a desire to simply let sleeping dogs lie. Reed found this reticence particularly pronounced when he inquired about local legends, old stories, or any unusual occurrences connected to the lakes themselves. Whispers of things best left alone occasionally surfaced, spoken in hushed tones, almost immediately followed by a dismissive wave of the hand or a forced change of topic. These were not the outright denials of someone hiding a crime, but rather the weary, almost resigned silence of people who had learned that some truths were too painful, too unsettling to confront. It was a community-wide agreement, unstated but deeply felt, to bury certain narratives. This subtle deflection suggested a collective memory of events that had never been fully resolved, tragedies that had been tacitly swept under the rug of time and local folklore. He discovered that in many of these isolated lake towns, there existed a deep-seated distrust of outsiders, especially law enforcement from larger jurisdictions. Generations had grown up self-reliant, solving their own problems, and keeping their affairs private. The notion of a detective from outside coming to dredge up old, painful memories, particularly those that touched upon potential local failings or uncomfortable truths, was met with quiet suspicion. It was a nuanced form of resistance, far more difficult to penetrate than outright hostility. Reed sensed that these communities, despite their outward charm and hospitality, harbored a profound secretiveness, a protective shell that had formed around unresolved traumas. His inquiries also led him to dusty local historical societies and forgotten newspaper archives. He spent hours poring over brittle newsprint, searching for any mention of other unexplained vanishings, strange accidents, or unusual local characters that might connect to his emerging pattern. He found fragmented accounts of old disappearances, some dating back decades, dismissed as accidental drownings or runaway cases, but which, viewed through his new lens, took on a more ominous tone. The descriptions were often vague, lacking the detailed investigation that modern policing afforded, but the common thread remained. Individuals who simply vanished, often near water, leaving behind no body and little explanation. The more he dug, the more convinced Reed became that the disappearances of Sarah Jenkins, Mark Turner, and Eleanor Vance were not isolated incidents. They were threads in a much larger, almost generational tapestry of unexplained vanishings that had quietly plagued these remote lakeside communities. The silence he encountered was not merely forgetfulness. It was a deliberate, almost ritualistic form of forgetting, designed to protect the fragile peace of small-town life from the terrifying implications of an unresolved darkness. Reed felt a chilling sense of a hidden truth, a secret so deeply embedded in the fabric of these regions that it had become part of the landscape itself, a shadow lingering just beneath the surface of everyday life. This deepening obscurity, far from deterring him, only solidified his resolve to uncover the insidious pattern, to finally bring light to the shadows that had lingered for far too long. 6 years crawled by since Detective Alex Reed had taken over the cold case of Officer Sarah Jenkins. 6 years of rereading files, chasing shadows, and confronting the quiet resistance of communities guarding their unspoken histories. The official investigation had dwindled to a bare minimum due to budget cuts and the sheer impossibility of the case. But for Reed, it had become a personal crusade. The image of Sarah's calm, professional face, staring out from the yellowing missing persons posters, haunted him. He spent countless off-duty hours delving into the advancements in forensic technology, particularly in underwater search and recovery. He knew that the original searches of Lake Champlain, while extensive for their time, had been limited by the capabilities of the sonar technology available in 2013. By 2019, when Reed picked up the file, and even more so by 2022, when he decided to revisit the lake, underwater technology had made significant leaps. High-resolution multi-beam sonar systems were now available, capable of creating detailed three-dimensional maps of the lakebed, even in murky or silty conditions. These advanced systems could detect objects with far greater precision and at much deeper levels than the equipment used almost a decade prior. Reed believed that if Sarah's patrol vehicle was in the lake, these new eyes could finally find it. He tirelessly lobbied for access to this new equipment, navigating layers of bureaucracy and skeptical superiors who saw little point in reinvestigating such a cold case. He presented his findings on the similarities with the Mark Turner and Eleanor Vance disappearances, arguing that Sarah's case might be the key to unlocking a larger, chilling pattern. His persistence eventually paid off. A small grant, secured through a state cold case initiative, allowed him to charter a specialized marine survey vessel equipped with the cutting-edge sonar. On a cool, overcast morning in late September 2022, nearly 9 years to the day after Sarah vanished, Detective Reed stood on the deck of the research vessel, staring out at the expansive gray surface of Lake Champlain. The water, calm and unyielding, seemed to hold its secrets with a mocking indifference. The vessel began its slow, systematic passes over the specific areas Reed had identified from his meticulous review of the original search grids and his knowledge of the lake's geological features. He focused on the region near the old lighthouse, but extended the search outward to the deeper, less charted drop-offs and depressions that had been difficult to survey accurately years ago. For days, the sonar technician, a grizzled veteran of countless marine surveys, meticulously monitored the flickering green and yellow lines on his screen. Hour after hour, the deep silence of the lake was broken only by the hum of the equipment and the rhythmic splash of water against the hull. Reed spent almost all his waking hours in the sonar room, his eyes fixated on the evolving digital map of the lake bed. He was looking for anomalies, for anything that didn't conform to the natural contours of the bottom. Most readings were expected: rock formations, scattered debris, schools of fish. But Reed held on to a sliver of hope, a gut feeling that had propelled him for years. Then, on the afternoon of the 29th of September, the sonar technician let out a quiet, almost disbelieving gasp. On the screen, at a depth of nearly 90 feet, approximately 1.5 miles northeast of the old lighthouse, a distinct, rectangular anomaly appeared. It was partially obscured by a rise in the lake bed and some silt, but its shape was unmistakably geometric, unlike any natural rock formation. Its dimensions, when carefully measured and cross-referenced, were consistent with that of a large vehicle. The coordinates were precise, pinpointing an object that had been hidden in plain sight for nearly a decade. Reed felt a jolt of adrenaline, a mix of grim satisfaction and cold dread. This was it. This had to be it. The long, agonizing wait, the countless hours poring over files, the quiet battles with bureaucracy. It all culminated in this single ghostly image on a screen. The object was located in a deep trench, an area that would have been incredibly challenging, if not impossible, for the older sonar equipment to penetrate effectively. The lake, which had held its secret so steadfastly for so long, was finally beginning to yield its truth. The next step was a dive team, and with it, the terrifying prospect of what they might find, or, perhaps more unsettlingly, what they might not find inside that submerged mystery. The discovery was not a resolution, but merely the end of one chapter and the chilling beginning of another, far more complex and terrifying one. The atmosphere on the marine survey vessel shifted from quiet anticipation to a tense, almost breathless focus. The sonar anomaly was no longer just a blip on a screen. It was a tangible lead, a physical presence demanding investigation. Detective Alex Reed immediately contacted the Vermont State Police dive team, providing them with the precise coordinates and the nature of the discovery. The divers, seasoned professionals accustomed to the often treacherous conditions of Lake Champlain, understood the gravity of the call. This was not a training exercise. This was potentially the final act of a 9-year mystery. Within hours, a specialized dive tender arrived on scene, carrying a team of 3 highly skilled divers and their extensive equipment. The gray skies of late September hung heavy, mirroring the solemn mood that had settled over the lake. A small crowd of media helicopters, alerted by the unusual police activity, circled high above, their rotors a distant thrum against the vast silence of the water. On the deck of the dive tender, the team prepared, their movements precise and efficient. Tanks were checked, lines secured, and communication systems tested. The lead diver, a stoic woman with 2 decades of experience navigating submerged environments, listened intently to Reed's briefing, her eyes betraying no emotion but a quiet determination. The first diver entered the frigid, dark waters of Lake Champlain. The depth at the anomaly's location was significant, nearly 90 feet, meaning the water would be bitterly cold and visibility severely limited. Descending into that murky abyss was like entering another world, one of perpetual twilight and crushing pressure. Guided by the sonar team on the surface, the diver followed the precise coordinates, her powerful underwater lights cutting through the silt-laden water. The descent felt impossibly long, the cold seeping into her wetsuit, the pressure building in her ears. Then, through the gloom, a massive, distorted shape began to emerge. It was upside down, partially buried in the soft sediment of the lake bed. As the diver drew closer, her powerful lights illuminated the telltale contours of a vehicle. There was no mistaking it. Even in its inverted, silt-caked state, the distinctive lines of a Ford Explorer, a police patrol vehicle, were clear. It was Officer Sarah Jenkins's missing car. A quiet, urgent confirmation was relayed to the surface. Detective Reed, standing by the dive tender's console, felt a surge of complex emotions, grim satisfaction that his long pursuit had finally yielded a result, and a profound sadness for what this discovery likely meant. The realization that the car had been submerged for 9 years, enduring countless storms and the relentless forces of the lake, was chilling. The dive team proceeded with extreme caution. The vehicle was precarious, partially settled in the soft bottom, and disturbing it carelessly could damage crucial evidence or even dislodge it further. The divers systematically documented the scene with underwater cameras, capturing every angle, every piece of debris, every anomaly before anything was touched. The footage, relayed live to the surface, showed the SUV's tires, now deflated and partially embedded in the mud. The front end of the vehicle appeared to have suffered some impact, but the damage did not seem consistent with a high-speed crash. There were no large, gaping holes, no catastrophic structural failures that would indicate a violent plunge from the surface. Instead, the damage appeared to be more localized, almost deliberate. As the divers moved around the vehicle, painstakingly clearing away silt and debris, their lights revealed more unsettling details. The passenger side window was shattered, but the glass fragments were mostly contained within the frame, suggesting a breakage from the inside or a controlled, localized impact. Most disturbingly, the driver's side door appeared to be slightly ajar, just enough to suggest it hadn't been fully closed when the vehicle went down, or perhaps had been forced open before or during its submersion. The interior of the vehicle was heavily silted, making visibility almost zero, but the divers could make out the general outline of the dashboard and seats. The recovery operation was slow and methodical. Specialized underwater airbags were carefully attached to the frame of the SUV. Slowly, agonizingly, lifting it from its muddy resting place. After hours of precise work, the vehicle was gently raised to the surface, dripping with lake water and caked in years of accumulated silt and algae. As it broke the surface, the grim reality of the discovery hit everyone present with full force. It was Sarah's vehicle, but it offered no immediate comfort, only a deeper, more chilling mystery. The questions that had haunted Williston for 9 years were not answered by the car's reappearance. They were amplified, taking on a new, horrifying dimension. The most pressing question loomed large. If the car was here, where was Officer Sarah Jenkins? The recovery of the patrol car was not the end of the investigation. It was merely the beginning of the end of the beginning, opening a new, more forensic chapter in a story that had stubbornly refused to conclude. The recovery of Sarah Jenkins's patrol car from the icy depths of Lake Champlain did not bring the closure the community desperately craved. Instead, it plunged the investigation into a new, more disturbing reality. The vehicle, now hoisted onto a specialized flatbed trailer, was transported to a secure forensic facility. There, under the meticulous gaze of forensic experts and Detective Alex Reed, the true, unsettling nature of its submersion began to unfold. The initial visual inspection confirmed what the divers had reported. The car was indeed upside down, heavily silted, but its general structure was intact. However, a deeper examination revealed shocking inconsistencies that shattered any lingering hope of a simple accident. The damage to the vehicle, particularly the front end, was not consistent with a high-speed impact against a natural obstacle or a sudden plunge into the lake. Instead, it suggested a controlled, almost deliberate impact at a relatively low speed. The crumple zones were compressed, but without the explosive force one would expect from an accidental plunge off a cliff or a road. The shattered passenger window was even more perplexing. The glass fragments, instead of being scattered outwards as they would in a crash, were primarily found inside the vehicle, indicating an impact or breakage from within or a focused strike from outside. Most damning was the state of the tires. All four were deflated, not from a puncture, but as if the air had been intentionally let out. This suggested premeditation. A vehicle sinking due to an accident would not have deflated tires. This was a detail that screamed deliberate action. Someone had tampered with the car, rendering it immobile before it entered the water. This single detail transformed the entire case from a missing person to a probable homicide investigation, a chilling realization that sent a cold wave through the forensic team. The interior of the patrol car, once carefully vacuumed and meticulously cleaned of the thick lake silt, revealed further unsettling clues. There were faint, almost imperceptible scuff marks on the ceiling of the driver's side, consistent with a struggle while the car was inverted. A small, almost invisible indentation on the headliner above the driver's seat suggested an impact. Despite the long submersion, small traces of dried blood were found on the fabric of the driver's seat and the steering wheel, too degraded for DNA analysis but clearly mammalian. It was not a large quantity, suggesting a single injury, perhaps a blow that rendered Sarah unconscious rather than a prolonged violent struggle. However, the most profound and chilling discovery was what was not in the car: Officer Sarah Jenkins. Her body was nowhere to be found. This raised an even more terrifying question. If she wasn't in the vehicle when it was submerged, what happened to her? Was she removed before the car was put into the lake? Was the car a decoy? The absence of her remains within the vehicle was a glaring and horrifying omission. Then, during the painstaking removal of the silt from beneath the driver's seat, a small, waterproof pouch was discovered, tucked almost invisibly into a crevice. It was an emergency kit, standard issue for officers, typically containing a small first aid kit, a miniature flashlight, and a compact multi-tool. Inside this pouch, carefully protected from the water, were two items that would shatter any remaining theories of an accident or simple disappearance. The first was Sarah's duty belt. Her service weapon was still holstered, secured with a retention strap, indicating it had not been drawn or used. Her handcuffs, radio, and spare magazine were all present. Its presence in the pouch, rather than on her person or discarded, was highly unusual. It suggested that she had either intentionally removed it and stored it, or it had been removed from her after an incapacitating event. The second item was a small, folded piece of paper, miraculously preserved by the waterproof pouch. It was Sarah's handwriting, confirmed by comparison to her departmental records. The note was short, terse, written with a sense of urgent precision. It read, "Not an accident. Find the cabin by the Forgotten Cove." The words hit Reed like a physical blow. Not an accident. This single phrase confirmed his deepest suspicions. Sarah had known. She had been aware of what was happening to her, and she had left a message. The note was not a cry for help, but a clue. A calculated risk taken in what must have been her final moments of clarity. It provided direction, a next step in a mystery that had stalled for nearly a decade. The existence of this note, hidden for so long within the depths, transformed the entire case. It was no longer a cold file. It was an active homicide investigation, propelled forward by the chilling voice of the victim herself. The cabin by the forgotten cove. The phrase immediately conjured images of the secluded, less traveled parts of Lake Champlain that Reed had identified in his initial review of the case, the very areas that had been difficult to search and where he had sensed a lingering secretiveness from the locals. The discovery of the car and the note answered some questions with horrifying clarity, but they simultaneously opened a terrifying new chapter. Sarah Jenkins was not lost to an accident. She was a victim, and she had left her own breadcrumb trail from the grave. The focus of the investigation now shifted from the vastness of the lake to the shadowy confines of a cabin, a place that might hold the ultimate, horrifying truth of her disappearance and the identity of her assailant. The lingering shadow that had hung over Williston for 9 years was finally beginning to take a concrete, chilling form. The discovery of Sarah Jenkins's patrol car, along with her hidden note, did not bring the clear-cut resolution the people of Williston had yearned for. Instead, it merely peeled back one layer of an onion, revealing a deeper, more chilling mystery at its core. The phrase, "not an accident, find the cabin by the forgotten cove," became the new mantra of the investigation, a haunting echo of Sarah's final, desperate attempt to leave a clue. Detective Alex Reed, armed with this profound revelation, understood that the 9-year cold case was now an active homicide investigation, one with a very specific and unsettling directive from the victim herself. The focus immediately shifted from the vastness of Lake Champlain to the more intimate, yet equally elusive search for the cabin by the forgotten cove. Reed revisited every map, every historical record, and every local legend about the more secluded inlets and coves of the lake. He knew that the term forgotten suggested a place not commonly known, perhaps even intentionally omitted from public knowledge. This was a place that likely held the key to Sarah's last moments, and perhaps the identity of her killer. The geographical features of Lake Champlain are complex, with countless small inlets, private properties, and remote, inaccessible shorelines. Many of these areas are dotted with old, often dilapidated cabins or hunting shacks, some of which had been abandoned for decades. The challenge was immense, to find one specific cabin, known perhaps only to a select few, hidden within a vast, intricate landscape. Reed theorized that the forgotten cove would be a place off the beaten path, a location that offered both privacy and a means of disposing of a vehicle without immediate detection. The very act of sinking a patrol car, tires deflated, suggested a methodical approach, a killer who understood the environment. Reed began by cross-referencing old property records with current satellite imagery, looking for any structures that might match the description of a cabin in a forgotten cove. He relied on the subtle instincts he had honed over years, paying attention to areas that had seemed particularly resistant to open discussion during his earlier interviews with locals. The quiet deflections, the immediate changes of subject, now took on a new significance. They pointed towards a shared, unspoken secret, a collective knowledge of something unsettling. The revelation that Sarah's disappearance was not an accident, but a deliberate act, sent a wave of fresh fear through Williston. The idea that a killer had walked among them for 9 years, silently carrying the burden of such a heinous act, was terrifying. The initial public reaction was a mixture of shock and renewed hope for answers. But beneath that hope, a deeper anxiety festered. If someone in their seemingly peaceful community was capable of such a thing, who could they trust? The close-knit bonds that had characterized Williston for generations began to feel fragile, strained by the insidious suggestion of a hidden monster. The police department, invigorated by the new lead, allocated resources to a renewed ground search, focusing on the most remote and challenging sections of the shoreline. Small search teams, equipped with detailed maps and Sarah's chilling note, meticulously combed the dense woods that bordered the lake, seeking any sign of a hidden path, a faint trail, or a dilapidated structure that might fit the description. The search was slow, arduous, and physically demanding, often requiring them to hack through thick underbrush and navigate treacherous terrain. The media, always drawn to the dramatic, descended once more upon Williston. News helicopters again buzzed overhead, and reporters clamored for updates, keeping the story of Sarah's murder at the forefront of the public consciousness. The renewed attention, while providing some solace to Sarah's family who had endured years of agonizing uncertainty, also served as a constant reminder of the unresolved horror that now overshadowed their lives. The knowledge that Sarah had been killed, rather than simply vanished, brought a specific crushing weight. It meant there was someone responsible, someone who had evaded justice for far too long. The cabin by the forgotten cove became the new, elusive target. It represented the next step in a journey that had spanned nearly a decade. It was the place where the final pieces of the puzzle might reside, where the full, horrifying truth of Sarah Jenkins's last moments might finally be revealed. The case, once a cold file, was now an active and intensely personal hunt for a killer. The shadow of Sarah's disappearance, once a vague, oppressive presence, had now sharpened into a terrifying focus, pointing directly towards a hidden place where justice had been denied for 9 long years. The community held its breath, waiting for the inevitable, for the moment when the forgotten cove would finally yield its dark secrets, and the identity of the person who had silenced Officer Sarah Jenkins would finally be brought to light. But as with all profound mysteries, the answer, when it came, would likely bring more pain than comfort and leave scars that time could never fully erase.